Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest edition of the Export to Japan podcast. And on this particular episode, we are diving into the world of how international companies should think about setting up their website for Japan, and in particular, topics like search engine optimization and how Japanese viewers to a website may have a different view on looking for information and what they might want. And this is a topic that we find is coming up more and more as questions from international companies that come to us through Export to Japan. So I was delighted to be able to track down a guy who knows a lot more about this topic than I do. And he's here to join us today. And I'd love to welcome you to the podcast. This is Jeff Crawford of Zoja Digital. Jeff, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Steve. It's wonderful to be here, especially as a listener to your show. I'm actually happy to be here as a speaker.
Well, thank you very much. And I'm very glad too that we've been able to track you down and looking forward to this discussion with you today. Now, as I said, we with a wide variety of different companies that we help with inquiries coming into the market, one of the topics that we hear coming up more and more is when they get to the point of thinking about their strategy for how they present themselves in Japan. The questions
Mm,
about should they have a Japanese website or should they have some landing pages in Japanese or something like that. So that's
mm.
the area that I really want to cover with you today. And I think to sort of get the discussion going, I'd like to kick off by really asking you about this topic of search engine optimization. And is it in any way different in Japan to the way it may be in Western companies? And how does that sort of impact search patterns and the way it goes in Japan?
Yeah. So I think in general, like the algorithms that Google and other search engines employ are basically the same for Japanese. But there is some differences, and you need to keep those differences in mind. I think everybody is familiar that Japanese as a language has three different scripts, right? We have katakana, hiragana, and kanji. So, a similar word or the same word can be expressed in different ways. Japanese are also okay with those 26 Roman characters as well. So, all those things can affect like search patterns in terms of how people search. Another issue with language is there's no spaces between words. And so sometimes that can create some interesting situations. There's a lot, I find because of the different scripts, there's a lot more synonyms. So that can also affect um, search patterns. And you can take words like brand names too, like Starbucks, right? So like how do you say Starbucks in Japanese? Of course you can do the katakana Starbucks or something like that, but a lot of times people just say Staba, right? And that's also that sort of concatenation happens a lot when people search. So that's just the language differences, but there's also like geographical differences as well. So I think when Japanese people are speaking, a lot of times they use this phrase like, inside versus outside. Because, Japan is surrounded by water. And so you can kind of talk like that, when you're speaking Japanese. Um, People tend to use trains and commute a lot, use mass transit as opposed to cars in the US, where I come from. Um, and that sort of pushes people to using more mobile devices. Keep in mind, like the average commute in Tokyo is like 1 hour each way, right? So you're more likely to be searching on your mobile device, or, you know, so is your website experience good enough, right? For that type of experience. The other thing too is like I think we all know this, people who have been here before, but everything is small and cramped, right? So Japanese people tend to have a much um, heightened awareness of things like size and space, right? And then once again, that can also affect search patterns as well, especially if you're talking about real estate or those types of fields. So there's many more. There, of course, there's privacy expectations, there's legal issues, there's general business cultural differences. You have to take in all these things into effect, and it basically affects is how people search.
Yeah, that's a great introduction, and I certainly will come back and ask some more specific questions on a number of those points because I think you raise
Mm-hmm.
really good points there.
Mm-hmm.
but keeping it fairly open at the moment, I guess to flip the question round a different way, I
Hmm.
know you and your company have a lot of experience of helping many international companies think about their strategy and implement their strategies for Japan.
Hmm.
What would you say are some of the kind of key mistakes that you have seen that companies make when they think about coming into the Japanese market?
Yeah, so we often get this as a digital marketing agency in Japan. Here's one very clear example. Not to pick too much on translators. They're really good at what they do, and I have no problem with them. But you have to be careful because they focus on accuracy of the translation. And one of the things we see a lot is they might take a keyword that's very popular, very popular in terms of search in English, and then translate it to a rather unpopular keyword in Japanese. And so, you need to take into account, yeah, what do people actually search for, when they're searching in Japanese. The other thing you need to take into account is just like the searcher intent, right? And sometimes that keyword might actually have a different meaning or slightly different meaning, or it might be like a word that's somewhat foreign to the Japanese audience. And so the intent might be much more informational, whereas in English, it might be a much more transactional type search. So, I've seen, yeah, in the clients that we've worked with, we've seen those types of mistakes. I also see mistakes around things like trust factors, like do users really trust your site? Um, Here's some examples. Like they show brands that we work with, but they're not brands that Japanese identify with, right? Um,
Mm,
they might show testimonials on the site, which are beautifully translated, but they're beautifully translated testimonials from Europeans,
mm,
they'd say, well, this doesn't really relate to us. Um,
mhm.
yeah, the About Us page has some certain types of expectations too that Japanese users want to see that's rather unique. Um, Case studies, oh, that's a big one. We have case studies, we have them beautifully translated. Are they helping a Japanese company be successful in this market? No. So,
Mm,
that's
mm.
another thing that we see. The other thing too is like, do you have a local office? Can I call a phone number? Can I expect a Japanese person to answer and listen to my problems? All these things can, um, having these things, how do I say this? I mean, these are like classic mistakes that we often see when we first start working with clients in Japan.
Yeah, great tips. And I have to say, in my last sort of 20 or so years of doing business in Japan, all of
Mhm.
those points absolutely ring
Yes,
true.
yes.
I've seen it and heard it too. And it's great to have people like you out there that can give this advice. And I guess one of the key messages probably coming across from this is before international companies even go about doing any implementation of their website and thinking about the content, the kind of points you're raising are the points they should be thinking about and working on in advance, and then use that to set the strategy and the tactics for how they go about their content and their case studies and their about us page and the examples
Yes.
they use. So yeah, it's really really good advice. I mean, I guess sort of delving a bit deeper into this point then, and sort of
Mhm.
picking your brains and your expertise on this. Are there any comments you would be able to give us on if we put ourselves in the eyes of the Japanese customer or the Japanese prospect or the Japanese visitor to our website, what's going through their mind? Help us understand a bit of the psychology of what they might be looking for or what they might be thinking when they're visiting an international company's website.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it really boils down to this. If I'm a Japanese person and I'm looking at a website, am I just looking at something that's like a translated English website, or am I looking at a product or service that really sells products or services that Japanese people use every day, right?
Mm,
Really comes down to that because I mean, like I said in the mistakes question you asked before, a lot of times um, we're just looking at translated English sites, and do we expect Japanese users to really want to use that? And often the answer is no. So if you can just make those steps, we just talked about a couple of those, like trust factors, case studies, brands, testimonials, you know, take make the extra amount of work to prove to the audience that, hey, we're actually, people actually use this service and they love it here in Japan. If you can make that extra step, you're way ahead of many other sites out there in the world.
Yeah, so your your view is, and I have to say, I kind of tend to agree with you from my
Mm-hmm.
experience. What the foreign companies should be thinking about is that Japanese users, visitors to the site
Mm-hmm.
do have the ability to spot whether there's been a serious investment in that Japanese
Mm-hmm.
website, i.e., it's just a translated version of the English website that may or may not have been done well or a little bit poorly.
Mm-hmm.
But even beyond that, they can really spot that difference about whether that true effort and investment has gone in to kind
Yes.
of localize
Mm-hmm.
not just kind of localizing the content, but
Mm-hmm.
the other wider issues of how it will appeal differently. Some of those topics you mentioned, you spoke about.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's interesting as we're having the conversation. I'm thinking back to a couple of the companies that I've worked with over the years, and I've seen a couple of strategies work where international companies to win that first piece of business in Japan, they almost take it as a loss leader. So they may not make
Yeah.
money. Indeed, I think in one or two cases they even lost money on it.
Mm-hmm.
But what they got was their first big customer, and they got a case study, and they got
Mm-hmm.
a Japanese, well-known Japanese brand as a customer that they could then talk about. And I guess that's one tactic that kind of fits in a little bit with what you're
That's
saying.
huge, right? And it's often a good thing to lead, like, hey, we'll offer our service to you for free. We'll take a big loss, but after we have this year engagement, would you be willing to do a case study with us, right? Huge, really huge,
Yeah.
especially if they're from a Japanese company, a well-known Japanese company, and especially if they had a good result from using your product.
Yeah. Got it. And I guess that tunes in a little bit to the whole point about the approach to the Japanese market. You know, as we all
Mhm.
know, it's certainly not a quick win market. It is a market where you have to
No.
be a longer term strategy and
Yeah.
take time and be patient. The rewards are good, of course, if you have the right product or service. It's so lucrative if you get it right. But these are some of the tactics that you know need that little bit of time and investment and
Yeah,
patience
you have to be
behind
in it for the long run, that's for sure.
it. I got that. I've absolutely got that. No, that's very good. Um, okay, what about then sort of linking on from that question, you know, some
Hmm.
good tips there from you on the Japanese viewers' mindset when they're
Hmm.
visiting the site.
Hmm.
What's your view on this kind of question about should foreign companies try to be kind of Japanese as much as possible? Whatever that may mean. What are your thoughts on that? I'd like to hear your view on that.
Yeah, I mean, let's say we took that question personally, like, Jeff, should you try to be Japanese as much as possible? Can you imagine me trying to bow and, use polite keigo in all the right spots and knowing the right nuance of every situation? I mean, I've been here 20 years and I still don't get it right. So I think um, the same could be said for brands. And, if they're looking at your company, your foreign company, and, should you try to be a Japanese company? Well, I say no. You should try to differentiate yourself and say, okay, we are a foreign brand. We're not going to try to hide it. But we are going to show that, hey, we do fit in, we do sell a product that Japanese people know and love. And, we have all this proof on our site. And, um, I think if you can do that and you can show them like, hey, we're a foreign brand and we're used, we're popular, I think you'll be okay. I mean, we all know this, but like foreign brands like Starbucks and IKEA, right? Have been around for a while, and are they trying to pretend like they're Japanese brands? No, they're not. They're proud to be foreign brands and Japanese love them.
Right. Yeah, I mean that's a great point you make on the end there. Actually, there is the potential advantage sometimes of being foreign because it does bring a little exclusivity or international flavor or international feel.
It
So,
does. Hmm.
as you just suggested with those couple that you mentioned there. So, yeah, okay.
Hmm.
Um, Okay, let's move on a little bit, Jeff, to
Hmm.
some of your sort of experience and knowledge of either examples you may have worked on in your agency yourself, or
Hmm.
if it's a little more difficult for you to tell us some of those, just maybe some
Hmm.
wider ones that you're aware of. But could you talk
Sure.
us through or give us some highlights of a couple of sort of digital PR campaigns that you're aware of that you've seen where
Hmm.
organizations have got it right and done things well?
Yeah. So uh, let's talk about SEO just briefly to set up the digital PR question first. Um, there's things you can do on your website to improve SEO, right? Like improve the technical aspects or have better contents or, better user experience when the user is on the site. But that's only half of it. The other half is, well, what are other sites, right, saying about your brand out there on the internet? Um, and a lot of times we see clients just focus on the first part, what's going on in their site, and completely ignore, what's being said about their brand elsewhere. So um, to help raise awareness, having digital PR campaigns is like a really important piece of that because you want other sites talking about your brand, linking to you, mentioning it to you, um, have it, contents that you create be shared on social media and whatnot. And so those are the types of things that you can really improve on by having these digital PR campaigns. So it's, I don't know if I call it a hot trend, but
Mm.
definitely it's a popular trend these days. And so, one of the things that we've learned to do at Zoe Digital Japan is that how to create these campaigns and be successful with them. And I thought I'd just give you, I think that's what your question was, like, give me some examples of some
Hmm.
of the stuff that you've done. Um, we this year we did a Valentine's Day survey. So this is kind of interesting. So um, we ran surveys in all 47 prefectures in Japan, and we asked uh, the participants, like, it's about love. So we asked them, like, have you ever confessed to your lover? And some other questions like that. And so we got the survey data and we rolled it up, and then we led with the headline of most romantic prefecture in Japan, based on the survey data. And so that was really cool. And then we published the article on our client's website on Valentine's Day, and then it quickly got picked up by various PR significance, like PR Times and whatnot. And so next thing you know, it ended up in, I think it was more than 60 different publications, all carrying, this survey that we did, and people were talking about it. We got calls from TV stations, and for the clients benefit, yeah, all of a sudden we have all these sites talking about a survey that was done by our client. So yeah, something like that can be yeah, really really helpful in terms
Yeah,
of
and I guess on
raising
that
authority.
example, that's just a great example of
uh,
that kind of out of the box thinking of a different angle to come to
mhm.
the topic.
Yeah,
And in your case, to do that great survey, I mean, it must have been a fair bit of work to cover all the prefectures. So I guess there was a lot of work there. But the spin-off of when it kind of went, viral in inverted commas, and you got
yes,
all
yeah,
that
it did.
publicity from it, which I guess the
Mhm.
majority of that is kind of free publicity
Mhm.
when people are talking about it in that way. It was
Yeah.
probably so worth that initial
Mhm.
investment. But
Yeah.
just out of interest, what kind of product area is it? What are that company selling?
Okay, so this client was like a sensei matching service
Oh,
where you want to get hooked up with a teacher that'll teach you English in this case, or actually other languages,
yeah,
German, French, Spanish.
got it.
So yeah, so that was, it was moderately appropriate to what
Mm.
the client wanted to see, and so they were quite happy. Yeah.
Yeah,
They were quite
beautiful.
happy with that. We have all these different techniques though. We did newsjacking, which is like taking something in the news and sort of like assuming, knowing that people are searching for it. We would like schlep off of that or piggyback off of that. Um, I think the best example that I can think of is do you remember when the game Fortnite was banned from the Apple company store? I think it's a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
So we came up with this idea of like, well, why don't we have like a list of top 10 apps that were banned from the Apple company store? And we acted on it really quickly. We published just a simple list article, right? Top 10, in Japanese, including a bunch of Japanese games and stuff, and published it. And then boom, you know, people were already talking about the Fortnite issue. And then boom, it got passed around and lots of people linked to it and shared it and whatnot. And yeah, it was really good.
And that's the first time I've heard that expression, newsjacking. That's a new one to me, but I get the concept that you're explaining. What again, what
Hmm.
a great idea. Being
Yeah,
aware of the current trends of what people are searching for and then somehow
right.
working out how you can fit
Hmm.
into that, right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, that's what digital PR is all about. It's about getting mind share, it's getting interest, it's getting people to link to your site or come visit your site. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Get it. That's it. Yeah, really interesting and a great example with that Valentine one.
Mhm.
That's a really good one. Not too far away to February next year, so maybe you'll be under
Yes,
pressure
yeah.
to
Maybe
think
we'll
of
do a
another great.
similar one. Yes. Yeah.
No, thank you for sharing those examples. Now, I want to jump back a little bit to we opened up this discussion, sort of talking about some of the key points that are relevant that companies should think about, and some of the pitfalls that they should avoid.
Mhm.
And we've spoken a little bit about SEO, and you did mention a couple of points. I mean, the point about the Japanese character set being so incredibly
Mhm.
different, and
Mhm.
how sometimes keywords don't necessarily translate, and quite often don't translate. So you mentioned, some of those points, but just going back to sort of SEO in itself, are there any other points that from your experience, that companies should be aware of when, things that you've seen again that haven't worked or failed, or companies have neglected to be aware of? Is there anything else we need to cover on that in that particular topic?
Yeah, so there's many reasons why SEO campaigns can fail. But let me just think of a couple. Um, I think sometimes, first of all, SEO is a long play, right? It's not something you can typically affect in 1 or 2 months, especially if you have like a competitive set of keywords that you're trying to go after. I think sometimes clients expect fairly quick improvement, where, like I said, you have to be in it for the long term, 6 months, 9 months, sometimes a year. And then you have to be willing to do some extra stuff. So that's sort of the second thing. Um, there's certain expectations about the company info page that Japanese users like to look at. They like to look at your company info page and see who the directors are, or how much capital they have, or
Mm.
contact info, all kinds of weird stuff that you wouldn't expect in an English market. Are you willing or flexible enough to make those changes just for Japan? I think the clients that are less willing or unwilling to make those kind of one-off changes, we often have a hard time trying to get them to rank, because Japanese users trust those sites much less. Um, let's see. I think also too, you have to look at the meaning or intent behind keywords. Um, let's come up with an example here. So let's say like DX, which in Japanese usually stands for digital transformation, right? And I don't know if I did a search on DX for English, but it might mean something completely different. But yeah, in Japanese, the letter D and the letter X usually means digital transformation. It's a huge topic in the last couple of years here. There's even like a digital transformation agency coming out of the government now. Um, huge topic. So the meaning itself has almost taken on like a completely different meaning, at this point. And um, if you are expecting the searcher intent to be the same in English as it is in Japanese. Yeah, in some cases you'll be okay, but in other cases you will fail.
Mm,
So,
mm.
yep.
Yeah, really interesting. And then what about from on that point, from the perspective of the way a typical Japanese consumer or user
Hmm.
may be searching for keywords, or I guess it's wrong. That's sort of talking with a technical brain, isn't it?
Hmm.
They're not searching for keywords. They're trying to find information. So
Sure,
they're
they are.
typing in sentences or questions
Mhm.
or certain words or phrases.
Yeah.
Now you we've covered the character set thing, and you made the difference there really clear. You made a
Hmm.
great point as well about how there's a higher proportion of sort of mobile users in Japan
Hmm.
related to those cultural issues of the commute every day
Yes.
and people sitting
Yeah.
on packed trains and
Hmm.
the densely populated space and stuff. But
Hmm.
is there anything else that foreign companies should think about in terms of how foreign people search versus
Hmm.
how Japanese people search? Have we covered the bases on that, or is there anything else to discuss on
Yeah, I
that front?
think we've covered most of them. I mean, we talked about the mobile search thing.
Mm,
Um, yeah, a lot of times how do I say, the search patterns are slightly different or sometimes significantly different. For example, like doing a mobile search, you can say something like something near me, right?
mm,
Cafe near me, which is a very popular search in the English language. But in Japanese, people don't do that so much. They tend to say the location and then cafe, right?
right.
So, Hibiya Cafe or something like that.
Mm,
And
mm,
so, what that means in terms of search patterns is you get all these local keywords, right? Huge number. Whereas in the equivalent English search, you may get much fewer, less.
got
So, you have to, yeah, keep that stuff in mind. We talked about synonyms too. So you might have to have multiple synonyms on your page just to make it super clear. Like I'm targeting not just this keyword, but all these synonyms as well.
mm,
So you have to be, I don't want to say keyword stuffing, but at least make it clear to Google's algorithms that, yeah, we want this type of traffic.
mhm.
Um, yeah, I think I've covered
Yeah.
most of them. Yeah,
Good.
at this
Yeah,
time.
thank you, Jeff. That's super useful. I mean, I think it's been a great discussion, Jeff. I'm a little aware of our time. I've got a ton more questions I could ask you, but I think we've covered all the really critical key points. And there's some, for me, there's some very strong messages coming out of this discussion. And I think, sort of in summary, the first thing I would always recommend is for international companies to reach out to agencies like yours, Jeff, and talk to people like you.
Hmm.
Right at the start of the process, right? Because
Hmm.
there's no doubt if they don't do that, if you're just going to be sort of playing catch up, if they start to do things, then you're trying
Hmm.
to kind of repair stuff and tweak things. But
Hmm.
it should be there's some clear, very strategic thoughts at that high level that they should be
Hmm.
thinking about before they even take any kind of action about starting any work to develop campaigns or Japanese
Hmm.
websites or Japanese landing pages or looking at an SEO strategy or anything like that. And certainly some of those key points that came out very clearly were being aware of the different character set and the dynamics around that, and the particular words and terms and how they may translate or not translate. Thinking about those trust issues, that's such a great point you made there. And it's
Yeah.
one that we certainly work on very strongly with international companies when we advise them to come into the market for the first time is thinking about how you establish that trust, and particularly if you're not a strong brand yourself that is already well known in Japan, how on earth do you go about establishing trust? And you gave some great examples of how people should think about that, winning those first Japanese clients that can then become case studies and referrals and things
Yes.
like that, and having that
Hmm.
local office and local address and perhaps some service where somebody can speak Japanese that's answering the phone and things like that. So all those kind of issues are important. Linked to the testimonials as well, and and then yeah, thinking about the creative way you can go about campaigns. That great example you shared with us of the Valentine Day one, and generating that busyness and that
Hmm.
awareness and making things go viral. So really good kind of key thoughts that we've run through there. So Yeah, well, I think, I hope for everyone listening in, I hope that's been a really good sort of overview and introduction. And Jeff, thank you so much for making your time available and sharing those wisdoms with us. I would certainly urge anyone listening in that if you've got to this point of listening in on the podcast, then you've got to be at a point where you're fairly serious about your strategy for Japan, for your website or your marketing campaigns. So I would urge anyone to reach out to Jeff at Zo Digital Japan or any other agencies that are out there that are offering these kind of services. Talk to somebody local, one of these experts, get a good idea from them of how they can help you and what advice they can give you. And you will probably save yourself a lot of time and a lot of hassle and get your results much quicker than trying to go alone without that help. So that would be my thoughts and advice. But Jeff, once again, thank you so much. Great to catch up with you. Thank you for sharing your time with us today, and look forward to catching up with you soon. And everyone listening in at home, wherever you are around the world, thank you for your time, and I hope you found this an enjoyable podcast. Stay tuned for more podcasts from Export to Japan coming up. Thank you.